Some games adjust their difficulty levels based on your performance. Some think that's good, some don't. I'm Falcon, and today on gameranx, the 10 best games with dynamic difficulty levels. Number 10, Homeworld 2 is an RTS from way back in 2003. You may remember it, you may not, I don't know, but it's really a great example of the genre. It has a great resource management system that gameplay very heavily depends on, and really does a good job putting together some interesting battles. Now, the game itself doesn't actually have a difficulty setting, however, it dynamically adjusts difficulty based on the composition of your fleet at the start of the level. There was an exploit though. You could convert all of your fighters over to resource units at the end of a level, which meant your fleet wasn't considered very strong, and you'd have a very easy difficulty level, as well as a buttload of resources to make new fighters with. Not that that ruined the game or anything, in fact, it's just a really good game that if you never got to play, you should try out, especially if you like RTSs. Number 9 is Godhand, a PlayStation 2 era beat-em-up game that was a lot better than I think critics called it at the time. And it unfortunately ended the studio that developed it, which really sucks because a lot of the game was pretty interesting. The way it handled difficulty level was essentially visible to the player at any given time, as the player either landed a bunch of attacks without the enemy even having a chance to counter. The game would notice this, and it would show you that it was bringing up the difficulty level. This also went the other way. If you just had your ass handed to you on a constant basis, that difficulty bar was going to go down. Making the difficulty level a visible metric meant that the difficulty level was actually a player-oriented gameplay mechanic, which meant it was something you could manage as the player, which is a pretty interesting concept actually. It was a pretty smooth game. I don't understand why it was not well received. It may have just been the time, so I feel like that game probably could be made now, and people would like it a bit more. Although it would require some modernization in its mechanics, but still. Number 8 is Mario Kart, which is a phenomenal series, but has always employed dynamic difficulty in a way that does cause arguments. Mario Kart employs a system called rubber banding. Depending on how well you're doing, the NPC cars will be modulated in speed. If you're doing well, they will go a little bit faster. If you're doing badly, they will go a lot slower. It can be laughable how stupid it is sometimes. Also, depending on what position you're in, whether first or last, changes exactly what types of items you'll get upon hitting a question mark box. Some people think this makes the game not very hardcore, but I would disagree because the better you get at it, the harder it is. And I think that that does a better job of teaching a player how to play than long, annoying tutorials. In my opinion, this system produces more good players, and for people who don't become good, keeps the game from crushing their souls. Plus, it's Mario Kart. That series is phenomenal. Number 7 is Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain, which does a phenomenal job with dynamic difficulty. This is, in my opinion, one of the better examples of this kind of tactic, because it learns from you and your tactics. For instance, if you like to go around and shoot people in the head, guess what? The enemies will hear about the guy who goes around shooting people in the head, and just like in real life, they would start putting helmets on. But I'm saying that it seems more realistic. It's a dynamic difficulty adjustment that just seems like a natural human reaction to an in-world myth spreading about the guy who goes around shooting everybody in the head. Seems real. There's other things that it does that attempt to encourage the player to vary their tactics, and it's not just that it is a great game that features dynamic difficulty, but probably one of the best systems of dynamic difficulty that has been implemented. Number 6 is Amnesia: The Dark Descent, a game that is phenomenal, but actually uses a fairly simple system of dynamic difficulty adjustment. There are a number of scripted encounters in the game that if they snag you up too much, the game is just like, alright, there's no monster anymore. Go on. Well, it's not quite that severe. I'm exaggerating a little bit. It might remove the monster. People who have caught on to this tend to think that it's a little bit cheap, especially given that the game itself is such a damn good game. But I would say if it has something that you don't entirely like, and yet is still amazing by your own taste, it's kind of a wash for me. It's not a great system, I'll say that, but I still enjoy the game. Number 5 is Fallout 3. Fallout 3 actually uses a system quite a few different games have used since, The Witcher 3 for instance, which is that as your character levels up, so do the enemies. You'll not only find stronger variants of current enemies, ones that you've encountered before, maybe with higher statistics or different weapons, or in some cases you have entirely new enemies that totally replace the older ones. There's also a difficulty slider that you can turn up or down, and you get different experience bonuses based on where it is. So between that and the gradually iterating changes in the difficulty level based on your level, it can be a pretty damn hard game. Number 4 is Fallout New Vegas, which actually has a similar system in place, but removes all of the bonus stuff and adds a hardcore mode. Now, the hardcore mode also affects how things heal, in addition to the automatic balancing that goes on as your levels go up. When you use a stim pack, it heals over time. You have to deal with ammunition that actually has weight and affects your movement. There's also various survival mechanics like eating, drinking, and sleeping that you have to do. And again, aside from the fact that as you level up, the other enemies also level up, as you carry more things, you can also do less. The longer you go without maintaining your body, the more likely you are to die. Honestly, Fallout 3 and New Vegas are both pretty damn interesting experiments in difficulty, and I think most game design since has derived something from both of those games. Number 3 is Left 4 Dead, which takes another very interesting and novel approach in what they have called the AI Director. Now, what the AI Director does regarding difficulty also actually intertwines with narrative. Left 4 Dead doesn't really have any specific narrative, but plays out as a series of events that is generally fairly different each time, at least to a degree, and the AI Director is why. The director pays attention to how fast the player moves, how many zombies they dispatch and how quickly they do it, adjusts small attributes of various enemies, whether or not they know where you are, sends more of them your way, etc. Valve calls it procedural narrative, and it's interesting because it does try to add certain events to the game to adjust to how you're playing it. It's a pretty novel concept that I'd like to see more game designers try to use. Number 2 is Max Payne, the original Max Payne, which did a really good job at keeping itself hidden from the player. You never really thought that the difficulty level was changing. You never went, hey, I don't think so, man. It pretty stealthily carried out its prime directive by just varying the degree of aim assistance that you got ever so slightly depending on how you were doing. So over time, if you showed the game that you needed it more, it would slowly give it to you more. It also attempted to project a skill level at all times, and changed enemy health depending on exactly how good it figured you would do in an upcoming fight. Now, it's not perfect, but it's a lot more subtle than a lot of the other ones, and a lot of the time it really just felt like a natural progression of difficulty. So whatever methods they used to measure your skill, at least for the time period, were pretty damn accurate. And finally, number 1 is Resident Evil 4, a game that keeps track of how well you're doing, how often you're getting hit, how accurate your shots are, and keep in mind, accuracy is a pretty intense mechanic in Resident Evil 4, one that I definitely have to say I enjoyed more so on the Wii than in the later versions of. But the game would adjust the health of enemies, how many enemies, the enemy placement, the enemy type, the aggression of the enemies, all based on how well you were performing, and that's pretty interesting. Not only is this regarded by a lot of people as one of the better Resident Evil games, it does make the game much more dynamic and changes your experience, adding replay value. So let's say over the course of a game you get very good at it and improve, and by the end of the game it's not necessarily that difficult and you play it again, you start off with all those skills, the game is like, oh wait, don't let them coast. And that's good, because we want games to allow you to play again and have a different experience, or just have a more enjoyable experience based on your own personal taste. In some cases, dynamic difficulty is implemented rather poorly, and it doesn't necessarily change whether the game is good or bad. Most of these were good implementations in good games. All of them were great games. But what do you think? How do you like this mechanic as it is used in games, both from the past and presently? Let's talk about it. Leave us a comment and click the like button if you enjoyed this video. If you're not subscribed, now would be a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week, and the best way to see them first is, of course, the subscription. As always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at FalconTheHero, and we'll see you next time right here on gameranx.